Hollywood youngsters. The other Hollywood youngsters. Hollywood youngsters.
I know.
Did you bring the money with you?
I wonder if it means the 800,000.
No.
Middle of the 61-62 season, right around Christmas time, I'm having a horrendous start. 35 games. I had only 13 goals. And had rented a home in Maywood, Illinois, from an elderly couple, an old swayback bed like this. And I'd wake up in the morning just as tired as when I went to bed. I went up to the lumber yard, got a 4x6 piece of 3/4 inch plywood, put it under the mattress. The first morning I wake up after sleeping on the plyboard, I was rested, went down to the stadium, had the jump in my stride again, and at that same time, Gunzo pitched me number 7, and I said, Gunzo, what are you doing to me? He said, we need a change of luck. So with the 7 on and the plywood underneath the mattress, away we went, and I scored 37 goals in the next 35 games to score 50 for the first time. So with the 7 on and the plywood underneath the mattress, away we went, and I scored 37 goals in the next 35 games to score 50 for the first time. With the 7 on and the plywood underneath the mattress, away we went.
Wayne Gretzky has been wowing people for 30 long years now, but he wasn't always the wonder kid headed for the Hall of Fame. We found some footage in the CTV archives recently of Wayne Gretzky when he was simply just a skinny kid with bad hair. According to number 99 himself, it was a day he'll never forget.
It was June of 1978, and little did he know it, but sports writer Jim Matheson was walking beside the biggest story of his lifetime.
Pretty accurate.
Ever trip.
It looked like he weighed about $160.
The group then boarded Scalbania's private jet and signed his first pro contract with Gretzky spelled with an S. With Gretzky spelled with an S. Spelled with an S.
Some days you may feel like you have got the whole world in the palm of your hands. That might be a little lofty, but it can be said that you have yourself in the palm of your hands points. By pressing these specific points on your hands you can relieve pain in other parts of the body, because each point on the fingers is associated with at least one organ in your body as well as an emotion. You just need to press each spot for 3 to 5 seconds and you will solve many health problems. Thumb. The thumb regulates the spleen and the stomach as well as depression and anxiety. Index finger. If you have problem with your bladder and kidneys, this point will help you to solve your problems with those organs. Also, this can help you to manage disappointment, fear, and confusion. By pressing this spot you can also get rid of toothaches, muscle pains, back problems, and heartburn. Middle finger. This point regulates the gallbladder and liver. If you're having problems with your temper or are feeling irritable or indecisive, by pressing on this spot can improve your mood. Also, it will help you to improve vision and blood circulation, to relieve pain from menstrual cramps and migraines. Ring finger. By pressing this point you can stimulate colon and lung function. It can also improve emotions such as fear of rejection and negativity. People who have digestive problems, skin conditions, or respiratory problems such as asthma can solve their problems by pressing on this point. Pinky finger. This point regulates the heart and small intestine. When feeling nervous, worried, or insecure, your confidence may improve by pressing on this point. By pressing this point can also resolve issues with bones, heart problems, throat pain and bloating. Base of the thumb. By pressing this point you can solve your problem with cough, respiratory distress. And also depressing this point can improve your thyroid function. Center of palm. This point regulates the stomach. Pressing on this spot will help you to alleviate abdominal pain or digestive distress. Fleshy part of palm. The fleshy part of palm is responsible for heart and endocrine function. This point can help you to regulate heart problems and balance out the hormones. Exterior of palm. Pressing this point can help you with appendix issues, and it will also help you to control your sugar levels.
Dog, God, the candy cane, okay? The word spelling or spellcasting in school. You're the witch, people. Every word you speak is a magic spell. It appears that you've given up the ship to the psychopaths, and you need to snap out of your illusion. And we get this place back from the comfort of home, people. You're the witch, people. Every word you speak is a magic spell. It's a magic spell.
Sonny West admitted he genuinely believes that he is a prophet and we were his disciples. He certainly had a power over us. He certainly had control over me. I admit it. Elvis's former bodyguards revealed that Elvis not only believed that he had occultic powers, but that he was a prophet and that they were his disciples. Red West declared he likes to be in control. He likes to be a God figure. For many years, with real seriousness, he called us his disciples. Red West declared with conviction that Elvis possessed some kind of special powers, something like psychic powers, he said. Elvis proved it to me again and again.
She wasn't even 14 yet.
Elvis lived with young teenage Priscilla in fornication for nearly 5 years until he was pressured for the sake of his public image to marry her. Elvis's marriage, however, never changed who he really was, as he turned from fornicator to adulterer.
Let's face it, from the time Elvis became famous until the very end, he never at any point seen other women, including with Priscilla.
Exactly.
Never stopped.
He was having her around when he wanted her around, see?
Elvis used Jesus Christ's name as a cover and actually was so promiscuous that he participated in orgies, sleeping with several women at a time.
You know that girl I was with last night? Oh, man, I'm going to tell you. She could raise a dead, boy.
Regarding Elvis's gospel music, Albert Goldman in his book Elvis, The Last 24 Hours, declared that, quote, essentially Elvis was a phony and that he feigned piety. Elvis's stepbrother, David Stanley, claimed that Elvis had a presence and supernatural powers.
A fascinating thing with him, David, was the supernatural side. You know, Elvis was very intrigued with supernatural.
It's like he had a presence, thinking about the supernatural.
Stanley claimed that Elvis's supernatural powers were such that he had witnessed him perform a stunning array of miracles. He claims of a storm that they were in that Elvis parted the clouds in ways that are reminiscent of Moses parting the Red Sea.
Thunder and lightning and hailing, one of those huge storms. And Elvis says, man, I'm sick of this. We couldn't even see our hands in front of our faces. And he said, I'll take care of it. So he rolls back the sunroof. The rain is coming in on us and everything. He took his hands and he went like this. And as God is my witness, the only reason I believe it is because I was there. He went like this, and it was like the whole thing split down the middle. Pouring down raining on one side, pouring down raining on the other side, and it looked like the yellow brick road in the middle. Sunbeams on the road all the way down the middle.
Despite the robust evidence backing up the allegations, not a single newspaper decided to run the story.
An executive from one very well-known newspaper told me that, in fact, his editor had also heard stories about Savile, but decided that because he'd only been dead for about 2 months by this point, it would be in bad taste to run the story. The doors closed, really, and the story was sort of no interest to any of them, which amazed me.
Another story, and the Jimmy Savile sex scandal at the BBC and with the police is rumbling on. 7 times, apparently, the police let Jimmy Savile off. That's the headlines of many of the newspapers today.
Suggesting a powerful paedophile network linked to Parliament and Number 10.
But the most prominent paedophile associated with the Savile ring was a man called Edward Heath, who you may recall was Prime Minister and took us into the EEC. Heath was into little boys, and Savile was supplying them. A number of these boys were taken out of the Haute de Garenne home in Jersey. Savile was taking children from a children's home with the support of German assets in Jersey. What was happening was that children's homes in the Channel Islands, particularly Haute de Garenne in Jersey, children were being taken from these homes, boys in the case of Edward Heath, as he was gay, and a paedophile, were being taken onto his yacht, the Morning Cloud. Savile was actually going out he went down to Jersey, and he was actually taking boys. There was another man involved as well, but Savile himself took boys from the children's home, where he was a guest, or welcome, onto the boat. So he was taking boys out onto Morning Cloud. Now, since Heath was well known, and since the boys were talking young men, the boys were murdered and thrown off the boat. That's why the BBC and the Cabinet Office have been so keen to protect Savile. That's why the Cabinet Office in the 1980s were willing to back Savile to the point of giving him a position of authority at Broadmoor, which is an absolute, you don't put a paedophile in charge of Broadmoor. The Cabinet Secretary at the time, who thankfully is no longer with us, Hunt, was also a paedophile, was in on this, met Savile. He was Catholic, met Savile, as did that very nice man, the late Archbishop of Westminster, Cardinal Basil Hume. Basil was not a paedophile, but knew Hunt and had a shrewd idea. He wasn't stupid, he had a shrewd idea of what had been going on, and I've no doubt was told to keep a lid on it. The Hunt was in on it, so the Cabinet Secretary at the time was in on it, was aware of what was going on, was aware he had a Prime Minister who was involved not just in abusing young boys, but was murdering them as well. It's quite possible that there was a crewman on the yacht who did the actual murder. I'm not saying Edward Heath necessarily bashed the boys on the Boko and tossed them overboard. He may have had somebody do that for him, but he was certainly guilty of murder under English law as an accessory or on the joint enterprise basis. Oh, if someone is inclined in that direction and you can supply them with boys, then you've got a hold on them, or girls. There's nothing worse for a politician than being exposed in the murder and sexual abuse of young people. And if you've got a politician who is abusing and killing young girls and boys, but boys or girls, then you've got a hold on them. When Jimmy Savile was taking, let's say, a 14-year-old boy down to Morning Cloud, handing him over to Edward Heath or a member of the crew on the yacht, it was a death ride. That was that boy's last journey on Earth.
This that I'm talking to from Operation Fernbridge made 2 films of Jimmy Savile.
Right.
2 very special films of Jimmy Savile. In one of those films, he was abusing a dead young girl in a mortuary. In the other film, he was filming a dead young boy.
That Sidney Cook was a friend
with Jimmy Savile.
Of Jimmy Savile.
My name is Robert De Niro. I have an enormous respect for people. I never really wanted to be anything, and it's a business that promotes and sells pleasure. Frank, it was a completely different world, because that was the world, with respect, of villainry. So there's no reason why all that pleasure cannot enter your own life. So all I ever wanted was to stop in bed. And then I turned it into a bit of fun, and I thought, stopping in bed is terrific. What else is there? And I thought, I know, a bit of fun. Don't worry, radiation is good for you. And if you're odd, you're odd. I'm quite used to being odd. In fact, I actually think myself that I'm odd. Strange to them, not strange to me. You are what you are. I am me for no reason other than I quite enjoy being me, and it's good fun, and that's the name of the game. Good fun. I never ever thought, for instance, that I was clever. Tricky, yes. I'm a very tricky fella. But if you're tricky, you don't slip up. You never slip up if you're tricky. No, because you're tricky.
Because you can get out of it.
Yes, if something comes in front of you. Whoa, can you get out of it? Because you're tricky. You can skate round it. If anybody said, oh, what's Jimmy like? Oh, I don't know what he's up to. It's a con job. That's called being tricky. I've got the ability to make a few quid, because I'm tricky. Like I said, tricky. I'm a rare breed insofar as I'm a single fella, but my game was not to have one wife, to have 1,000. Golden hair. Golden hair. I can't help it, I'm a single fella.
Well, there's nothing wrong with it, you haven't broken any laws, have you?
None whatsoever. And if I do, well, I'll stand for that as well. Oh, I've just seen him walking down Briggate, give over. But I know that today is a new day. There's new strokes for new folks. I've won about 140 different awards in old money. Oh, yeah, that was wonderful. Give over. I never brought any harm to anybody. I've never bad-mouthed anybody. It sounds a bit yucky, but it's my nature, it's my lifestyle, and I never thought there was a profit in being bad. There might be a profit for a few days, a few weeks, even a few years, but sooner or later you get your comeuppance. So I had a bit of fun at nobody's expense. Never did any harm to anybody in my life. If I arrive at the gates of heaven and St. Peter says, you've been a very tricky man, you can't come in here, I'll break his thumbs. A lot of people can't get away with it. A lot of people like to do that, but they can't get away with it. I was lucky insofar as I got away with it.
For years he was a TV and radio superstar and a friend of the rich and famous. And a friend of the rich and famous. And a friend of the rich and famous. And a friend of the rich and famous.
He was pretty much ingrained in the nation's consciousness.
Nobody tells me to do anything, baby.
Oh, right.
I tell them what's happening.
He had friends in the very highest echelons of society.
But since his death in 2011, the sinister truth about Jimmy Savile has been revealed. Jimmy Savile, once one of the nation's favourite stars, adored by millions of TV viewers, is now regarded as one of the country's most prolific sex offenders. His preying on young victims and just how he was allowed to carry on abusing children for decades are crimes that shook Britain. Jimmy Savile was born in Leeds on the 31st of October, 1926. As a young man, he worked as a coal miner before an injury forced him to change career. He became an entertainer and began running several nightclubs in the north of England. It wasn't long before his reputation preceded him.
When Jimmy Savile first came to Leeds, no one knew him, and after a month, everybody in Leeds knew him or have heard of him because they are outlandish things that he used to do. The way he dressed, the way he did his hair, for instance, you know, just to get himself noticed.
You know, if he came to our house, there'd obviously be I'd say a couple of dozen. It could be a couple of 100 people all outside the house and round his car. And, you know, so you'd obviously walk down with a big chest and your head held high, you know, saying, oh, is that my uncle, sort of thing. We never went out saying, you know, we've got a famous uncle called Jimmy Savile or all like that. he was just Uncle Jimmy, and that was it, really.
He was a well-known figure in the north of England. He was a sort of an amateur disc jockey who hadn't really broken into television yet.
And he introduced dancing to records, which had never happened before. He started for younger people on a lunchtime, just dancing to records, and it really took off.
Jimmy Savile began working at the Locarno nightclub in Leeds in the late 1950s. Dennis Lemon was employed by the club and became Savile's unofficial minder.
He tried to give himself this reputation of a tough guy in a restaurant and all this that.
Even as his showbiz career was taking off, Jimmy Savile began to be dogged by accusations. Savile began presenting the show that would make him a household name, Jim'll Fix It. The program was broadcast on Saturday evenings and ran for almost 2 decades. At its peak, the show attracted viewing figures of 15 million, with the production team opening almost 5,000 letters a day.
I got letters just bombarding me. There were so many letters, and it was up to me to sift them and give them to Jim for his decision. But it was hard, but there was a lot of letters, and it just grew like Topsy, and that's how it all started.
Despite his on-screen persona, Savile's attitude to children was apparently different when the cameras were turned off.
He did not like children at all. He tolerated them, but that's about as far as it went for the value of the programme.
I think all children should be eaten at birth. That's for sure.
He had a set rules and he knew how far he could go. They might have sat on the arm of the chair, but that's as near as it got.
What is apparent now, though, is that this seeming aversion to children was no more than a camouflage to ward off suspicion. A device Savile used throughout his life to stay ahead of the rumours that dogged him.
Well, there's only one thing I can do now, and as if you cheat down there, Mr. Cameraman, I'll slap a bell of that. Oh, my goodness gracious.
As well as his TV and radio career, Savile was renowned for his charity work, raising millions of pounds for several charities, including the Leeds General Infirmary and Stoke Mandeville National Spinal Injury Centre.
Jim, because he was Jim, liked high-profile things. Stoke Mandeville was very high-profile. It was world famous for its treatment of the paralysed. Leeds General Infirmary was a big teaching hospital. So he generated to things that had quite a high publicity value. And as a result, he benefited, but so did the hospitals.
Jimmy Savile may have raised around 40 million in his lifetime for charity, but looking back, I think it's easy to now see that his charity work was a very convenient camouflage for his activities and helped him gain access to vulnerable, young people, in fact, in hospitals, in children's homes, in events linked to the BBC, and indeed, of course, his involvement with Broadmoor and the fact that he was actually given the keys to Broadmoor.
Broadmoor, the high-security psychiatric hospital in Berkshire, is home to some of the UK's most notorious criminals. Past occupants include Peter Sutcliffe, Charles Bronson and Ronnie Cray. Savile had volunteered at Broadmoor for years, but in 1988 he was given a senior role along with a house on site and, incredibly, access to patients.
The facts that he was given keys to a place such as Broadmoor, that he was allowed to walk the hospital wards where there were vulnerable children in Stoke Mandeville and other places, again, is incomprehensible. And yet nobody seems to be taking responsibility.
But who, I think, felt that they would never be believed.
If you're a friend of the Prime Minister, you're photographed with these people, you are, in the public eye. The idea that you might at the same time be abusing children is monstrous.
Here we go with what's called a medical breakthrough.
He had, if you like, all the established. He was actually fated.
As well as having almost unrestricted access to Broadmoor and its patients, Saville also managed to secure regular visits to Duncroft School in Surrey, a residential school that housed young girls who had been sent there by the courts.
The girls at Duncroft were certainly, although intelligent, were vulnerable. But Saville, I think, also worked on the principle that the mixture of his fame and the fact that he was treating them to things like trips to the BBC or trips out in his Rolls Royce, that this was, if you like, a thrill that, you know, that they wouldn't get from their normal lives in effect in an institution. So I think he gambled on that would at the time would actually guarantee their silence.
Anything that moved seemed to be a potential victim for Saville. But he clearly also was clever at targeting lots of very vulnerable victims as well.
She said, "Who's going to believe me, an ex-approved school girl, against Jimmy Saville with all his fame, all his money, and being a house guest of Margaret Thatcher at number 10 and Chequers?" And with hindsight, one knew that she was probably right.
He had friends in the very highest echelons of society. Princess Diana and him were friends. Nobody messed with Jimmy Saville because he had connections that were unique, if you like, to somebody in his position. It was like he was the puppet master controlling everything that was going on.
By the end of the 1990s, after a glittering career, Saville's showbiz star was fading. And whilst his TV appearances grew less frequent, his near-constant charity work earned him a knighthood. His armour of respectability was complete. However, the public persona of Saville, the entertainer and showman, was at odds with how people actually viewed him when the cameras were turned off.
Saville had long been regarded as a pretty suspicious figure by a lot of people in journalism, in Fleet Street, at the BBC.
One, I'm very boring. I don't do drugs, I don't do underage sex, I don't do any of them things that they print in papers today.
He almost invited you to think of him as a slightly grubby, eccentric individual.
I hope that cigar is not lit that you have in your hand.
No, it's not lit.
Jimmy Saville. Did the doctors not tell you to get off that?
Nobody tells me to do anything, baby.
Oh, right.
I tell them what's happening.
I feel that, yes, he hid his darkness in the light.
You've been doing Jim Will Fix It for 20 years. Did anybody ever fix anything for you?
Yes, because my case comes up next Thursday.
Right, and I hope you get off it.
No, it'll be a change if I get put away.
A lot of people didn't like him. They didn't like him because of the way... A lot of people called him creepy. But he used to go round the wards saying things like, oh, you're beautiful, and give me your hand, and he'd take their hand and he'd kiss the back of their hand. And
Saville's position as showbiz royalty, as well as his charity fundraising, once again ensured the rumours and gossip about his behaviour remained exactly that. It would only be after Saville had died that the shocking nature of his crimes would be laid bare.
It was good while it lasted, reads Jimmy Saville's headstone. The same can now be said of his reputation.
His reign of depravity lasted from the 1950s until his death in 2011. Throughout his life, he convinced most people he was nothing but an eccentric.
That the person in control of that interview was Jimmy Saville. It was not the police.
From what's coming out in the press, and most recently the transcript of his interview with Surrey Police, the tone of the interview is one of almost, I'm sorry I've got to ask you this again, but you know, we've had these allegations made to us, which is not really a very confident way of putting an allegation to get a structured response.
As well as his obvious denials of any wrongdoing, were the undercurrent of threats and intimidation within the interview. I mean, he virtually said that he would have them in the courts if they messed with him.
The authorities decided that given the lack of evidence, any pursuit of Saville was futile, and the charges were dropped.
In the town where I was born lived a man who
Now, there are some groups that are quite open in their advocacy in the music that they present. They advocate social justice. They call for an end to war. They wish for a time when there might be a change in the drug possession laws. Your music did not do that. There wasn't a great deal of out-and-out editorialization in the songs that the Beatles did. At least I didn't feel it, and I don't think that a lot of parents felt it.
Now, all our messages were subliminal, you know. Meaning we were sending messages out, all right, but...
There were many people who did not really understand what you were doing.
Now, all our messages were subliminal, you know. Meaning we were sending messages out, all right, but...
Were revolutionary. It took so many of us such a long time to get into your act and to realize what you were doing.
Hey, Mr. Boo, you can come with us if you like.
You mean you take a nowhere man?
Yeah, come on, we'll take you somewhere.
Picture yourself just out nuclear fission with library cards under metaphor skies. Somebody quotes you read from the source book, a concept with microscope eyes. You take a nowhere man?
Yeah, come on, we'll take you somewhere. Sige, snor om dig.
Nej, wala kæft, niwe.
Ja, vi vil se dem måske. Løbe til mig.
I saw the photograph.
You got strawberry fields. You know the place where nothing is real. Well, here's another place you can go, where everything grows. Into the playback tulips, see how the ill have lived. Look into a glass onion. I told you down from Horace to me. You know where it's closest to me, where he's another doing wrong. The war is the fall. Standing on the fence again, laying on tiny against me, yeah. Looking through a glass onion. You got strawberry fields. You know the place where nothing is real. Well, here's another place you can go, where everything grows. Into the playback tulips, see how the ill have lived.
So I want you to go for it, William. Just what are we talking about here? Manifesting in the OBE state. What is this all about?
Well, the basics of it is simple, is that we live in a multidimensional universe, and we are multidimensional beings. And that all things, and we have to look at the world in reverse of what many people look at it. People look at everything as being a form-based, a physical event and a physical object, and reality is only physical. But once you open your mind to the concept that the universe is multidimensional, and that when we leave our bodies, whether it be spontaneous or self-initiated, the same applies to near-death experiences, we are moving inward into the non-physical aspects of this multidimensional continuum. So, all manifestation begins inward as a thought form. All manifestations, the entire planet, everything we see around us is a part of a spectrum of creation. In other words, every tree, every home, everything that surrounds us is multidimensional. And this is proven time and time again when we have OBEs, because we begin to enter the less dense areas of the universe. Look at it this way, the physical is the epidermis of the universe. It's the outer crust. And when we leave our bodies, we enter into the subtle substructure. And as such, that is where the manifestation begins. And if we go deep enough in, we realize that everything around us manifested as a thought first. In other words, everything around us is a thought form, which is probably the best way to think of it. It's a very subtle projection of thought energy, which is very creative. It begins to take shape. When we focus on any kind of thing in our lives, we begin to mold that subtle energy that exists all around us, but we can't see it because it's so subtle. And we begin to shape these thought forms when we begin to remain focused on a specific object. And we're doing this all the time. And these thoughts are the beginning of creation. The mechanics of creation is an inward to outward process. It doesn't just magically appear in the physical, even though it may look like that to us. Suddenly there's a physical object. There's a mechanics occurring, and this mechanics is exciting because we are the creators of this very thought form creation to any form that we focus upon. And this is a substructure of matter. Each of us is constantly molding our future reality by how we manipulate and focus our thoughts today. This is the unseen mechanics of creation. We do it all the time. Everything is consciousness at its core. So everything has been on some level created by some form of consciousness. And it's quite exciting because everything is a manifestation. My wife and I's thoughts on manifesting this had begun to shape the non-physical parallel world that is a substructure of my physical world. And we, collectively, had begun to alter the substructure of matter energetically with our thoughts. In other words, this fireplace was beginning to take shape energetically in the non-physical dimension. And this is the mechanics of creation. This is what we do all the time when we focus on a creative act or process in our lives. And we're affecting the substructure of matter, which is the non-physical dimension parallel to us. And this is the building blocks of all creation. It all begins from the inward dimensions and then works its way outward into matter. This is also what I feel that psychics are reading around us when they begin. People say, what is a psychic actually reading? People get readings for the future. Yeah. Many psychics, I feel, are actually picking up on the thought forms that are around us. Because this is in our energy field. We're carrying our future. If you're fixated on whatever it may be, that is part of your energy field. And psychics are sensitive to energy. They're sensitive to thought forms, which is energy. And they are picking up on this future that you are beginning to build in your own energy field. This is a very important process. This is part of one of the reasons we're in a physical body. We're learning how to be consciously powerful and effective creators of our reality. And when we begin to recognize that we are the creative force, very few people are aware of it, though. They think their world is ruled by luck and a coincidence. But eventually we have to grow up and learn that we are the creative energy force. And we have to learn the rules of the road. How do we manage our energy? How do we manage our creative force so that we can build the life we want instead of being the result of other people's thoughts? And that's what's causing a lot of the problems in the world, is that there's a collective thoughts are very powerful. Nations have a collective thoughts. Religions have collective thoughts. And they are, the more people that are involved in this creation of these thought forms, so often the more powerful these thought forms become. And people are, in a sense, are being manipulated by the collective thought forms, and many of these are negative, like as we see in the world today, these groups that are going around killing people. Because why are they killing? They're killing them for an idea. It's an idea they're killing for. So we have to learn to take control of our own thought forms, not only so we can be effective creators of our own reality, but also so that we're not manipulated like puppets by other groups' thought forms that are always in our environment because they're part of our living condition. Right. In other words, the government puts out thought forms or collective. The media puts out thought forms. We're constantly manipulated or conditioned from birth often by certain belief systems, and then we're indoctrinated as children by these concepts that we believe about ourselves and our reality. And all of these are thought forms that are influencing us. So we have to learn to not only to be the powerful creator of our own thought forms, but to also realize and learn how to defend yourself from other people's thought forms that may be somehow manipulating your state of consciousness. Right. Look at all the things that we've been indoctrinated to believe from birth. And anybody that thinks they're not indoctrinated, they have to ask themselves one question. What would you believe today if you were born in Iran or China? What would be your belief system? What would be your religion? What would be your national flag that you would defend with your life? You know, everything about your beliefs today would be altered and shifted. So we have all been indoctrinated by our society and our culture. And often the indoctrination was not necessarily for our benefit. It's for the benefit often of the collective. It's not for the benefit of the individual. And that's what we always have to be careful of. Look at the belief systems today and how some of them are so incredibly warped and dangerous. And yet millions and millions of people believe these belief systems where you have to kill someone who doesn't agree with you. And it's running rampant in the world. It's nothing more than a thought form created by a collective that is spreading throughout the world. That's what I mean about we have to be careful. There's an old saying, don't believe everything you think. Because we have to be strong enough to step outside ourselves a little bit and examine our own beliefs. Why do you believe what you do? What evidence supports your beliefs? You know, why do you feel the way you do about certain things? Is it because you were conditioned from birth to believe a certain way, which is often the case? It really takes some effort and courage to examine your own beliefs. Are you really a free thinker like you may think you are? Are you just a puppet of religions and governments and powerful belief systems of the media? The universe is all about the molding of energy and then how it manifests in our lives and how open we are. And this is another thing. You have to be open to change, open to different things. Many people want to manifest things in their lives, but they're afraid of change. And a big part of manifestation is about opening your state of consciousness to be almost unlimited change. And that's when things happen quickly. People give it different names. Theosophists have called it the astral. Yogis have their own term for it. But it's all the same thing. It's a parallel energy world that exists. It's not separated from us. It's here. It's now. All dimensions exist here and now. They're just vibrating at a less dense level. Everything is here. And that's one thing I think it's important to get across. A lot of people think of this concept of heaven as being some imaginary realm separated from us. And the non-physical realms are somewhere up or wherever. And nothing could be further from the truth. We are existing in all dimensions currently. And all dimensions are inside of us, as close as our heartbeat. Each inner dimension becomes progressively less dense and more thought responsive. And that's what's interesting, more thought responsive, because that is why our thoughts can mold these thought forms very, very easily and quickly, because they're no longer dense. And as we move inward within ourselves, which is into the universe or each dimension that we enter becomes even less dense and more thought responsive. So our body is like the end result of a chain of events. And so is the creative process, because we're a microcosm of the universe. We are right now at this very moment, all of us are creating and molding our future energetically with the very thoughts that we focus on. And we, in many cases, negating certain aspects of it by the negative energy that we throw out. And then the other aspect of it is being open to these changes that are occurring. So it's a continuum of creation that's always in process. It's quite amazing. I feel strongly that's one of the reasons that we're in a body. We have to learn through trial and error to become masters of our own creative process. Once you become adequate at stabilizing your non-physical energy field, you can begin to manipulate the environment around you by your focused intention, by the way you focus. Now keep in mind, the astral is, the next level up is not the astral. It's a denser region. I call it, many in the past have called it the etheric. I just call it the parallel world. That area is still very dense. We have to go to the next level, which is the astral. And even that is not totally instant. Only until you get into the thought realms of pure thought is it instant. There's still a delay for most people in the astral, but you're much closer to the source. For those who have developed the ability to stabilize their energy body in the astral dimension, they can begin to manipulate the energy around them. They can create the energy forms they choose, and they can stabilize these energy forms by the very thoughts that they're holding. Because the environment, remember, this environment is 1,000 times more subtle than the physical. And you can just focus on whatever it may be, and you can begin to manifest it before you. It's an amazing process. You can witness this yourself. I have. In other words, what you can do is create the energy mold of something that will manifest in the physical world. This is what the ancient forms of magic were really about. They would go inward into an altered state, and they would make shifts. And this is what shaman are also known to do. Right. Shaman are famous for making alterations of the unseen dimensions to affect the seen or the denser dimensions. And you do this by just stabilizing your energy field and focus on whatever you wish to create in your life. And you bring it into 3D form in the astral. And this is now what you've done is created a new form, the mold, the substructure of a new creation in the physical world.
What are we doing here? What's the next step?
Well, let's use the cars. Then you would just focus on the picture or the image of a car in your mind. And the very act of doing that will create the external energy image of a car on the astral.
So you would see that, you described it earlier as a sort of a holographic representation.
Yes.
While you're, we'll call it out of body.
Yes. And whatever it may be. Yeah, but let's use the car. Yes, you could create a car. You could create, and what happen, if you trust yourself, it will happen very quickly. People, this has been done since the beginning of time, but most people this is really the unseen mechanics of miracle. Sure. This is how miracles are manifest. People are in connection. Someone like Jesus, for instance, had the ability to heal, and there's been hundreds of saints and prophets that have had all kinds of capabilities. But they were open to this idea of manifesting the non-physical realm, and they would bring that into fruition by being open to that image they've created, and they manifested it by just the process. Now, during an OBE, you're closer to the formation, the energy formation, to the substructure of this image. And because you are consciously active, it's a very powerful state. And you can mold any energy that you wish, because all matter is energy. You're molding energy, and now you're just focusing on it and creating this energy mold that eventually will become a physical mold. Yeah. The same applies, the same process applies in a lucid dream. We have the ability to shape and mold our reality in a lucid dream. Now, many people state, some writers state that there's 7 levels of a lucid dream. So I'm talking about a lucid dream where you are incredibly conscious, not some flighty thing, where you have control of your reality. And many people have this in their lucid dreams. Now, there's people that this is their main, let's just say this is one of the main ways they explore their own state of consciousness is by lucid dreaming. And many people today have the ability in a lucid dream to consciously create. And what you're doing, in a sense, that's why it's very important that you know what you're doing. So you create something that you really want. Because let's face it, your subconscious mind can go wild and create anything, including, negative things. Yeah. So we have to be aware that as the creative source, let's say, of these energy forms that we are molding around us, we have to take responsibility for the forms that we are molding, because they are our future reality if we continue to do so. The main thing to remember is that we are the central player. We are the core. Everybody looks outside of themselves, or many people look outside themselves. We're looking in the wrong direction when we do this. It's like looking outside yourself. The current term is to be saved. The Buddha said it best. We must save ourselves. No one can, no one may, is a quote 12 centuries ago. And, it's very true. I mean, we have to first fully take responsibility for all the creative processes that are under our control, our thoughts, our emotions. We have to be open, and very open to the fact that we are not only responsible for every thought and every emotion, and we are constantly spewing these out into the universe around us. Constantly. And that's why it's important that we take total responsibility and don't look outside yourself and point. When many people today are always pointing their finger out at someone did it to them. That's right. The government, the church, their parents, whatever. This is the most negative of thought forms you can possibly create, because you completely disempower yourself when you do this. And you negate your ability. All right. One of the big questions I think we all have to ask ourselves is, what do we believe and why? What supports our beliefs? And because often these beliefs can be very restricting and inhibiting us in our creative process. We've been told that many of us from a very young age we're kind of put into a box of who and what we are and what our capabilities are. I think it really comes down to us having the courage to really examine. I'll use an analogy of something, why it's so important to do this. One of the basics, probably the prime basic tenet of humanity is that we're physical humans. And one of the first things I learned in my out-of-body experiences, after about a year of having OBEs, is that when I prolong my out-of-body experiences, my humanoid form, my male identity, all of that would begin to dissolve away. My hands would dissolve away. My feet would dissolve away. And if I prolong my out-of-body experience for more than, there's no time in that state, but let's just use the term of a few minutes. As I prolong my out-of-body state, my entire humanoid form began to dissolve away, and I became like a teardrop or a globe of consciousness. And then as I prolonged it even further, I became a point of consciousness. In other words, I'm not human. We are not human. And yet, that's one of the great belief systems of probably the basis of our entire society. And if that is flawed, just imagine. If that is flawed, imagine how many other beliefs about us that we hold are flawed.
And not just flawed, but false.
False. In other words, we're not male and female. We're not, all these identities that we connect ourselves to limit us. We're not Chinese. We're not Americans. We're not male or female, or all these identities are flawed projections. We are just pure consciousness with unlimited capabilities. And that's why it's important to recognize that. Then only when we fully recognize our full capability as just a creative soul can we really begin to become master manifestors. Well, most people in the initial out-of-body experiences, you hold your self-conception. So for the first year, I still was a male. I was just like I am now. I was exactly the same, because that is the self-identity that I held of myself. It's only after repeated experiences and repeated experience of traveling beyond your physical limits and moving inward into these other dimensional parts of yourself That's when you begin to realize that our capabilities are not limited to this three-dimensional form. And that's when it begins to dissolve away, because you no longer need to think for a moment. There's no air in the out-of-body, in the non-physical, in the afterlife. The entire afterlife, all of us are going to die. There's no air there. There's no molecules. There's no molecular structure. So think about it. It's a whole different game with new rules. There's no need for ears. What do you have eyes for? There's nothing to see. You use your mind as a perception, and your mind is forming these images that you hold of yourself. But when we die, there is no density. There's no molecules, all the things that we're used to and accustomed to. For instance, there is no gravity. There's no mass. So all the things that we take for granted are gone. And you quickly realize that the entire rules of reality have changed.
Right.
And that in other words, if you want to fly, you fly. The only thing limiting someone in the out-of-body state is their own self-conception and the limits that they bring with them. And this is what limits many people at the beginning, because they still believe that for instance, if you believe that you're a three-dimensional human female, you will continue to exhibit that form and all the limits of that form. We all carry our own limits with us by what we choose to believe about ourselves and accept. This is why it's so important to reappraise everything, because consciousness is not human. Right. Consciousness uses the humanoid form as a vehicle and a tool of expression, temporary expression in the physical world. And once you realize that, you begin to get a handle on, oh my God, I am an unlimited spiritual being with unlimited capabilities to create my reality in any way that I choose. This is a huge revelation, because once you accept that throughout your being, the limits begin to melt away, and so does your external form, because they go hand in hand. And then you begin to become more increasingly unlimited in your capabilities to explore other dimensional reality. I've had quite a few different events that were quite shocking to my sense of reality, because for the first year I was just like anyone else. I was walking around the etheric level in my non-physical body, acting just like I would as a physical person. And then one day, spontaneously, it was in the early 70s, I had a spontaneous, what I call a shocking experience, where I suddenly found myself, and it felt like, it's difficult to convey this, but I found, like, right out of the gate, when I began to have my OBE, I found myself, and my mind interpreted this as I was shooting up through layers of color. Now, of course, now I know better. I was moving inward. It was my mind's interpretation of a huge shift of consciousness. And it was scary. It was frightening, because you feel like you're losing your everything, all your concepts of reality. But my state of consciousness was shooting up through layers of color. I found myself floating in what my mind perceived as a sea of pure white light and consciousness and knowledge and just pure love. And that's when it hit me. I was no longer humanoid. I was no longer Bill or Buellman. I was something else. But I still maintained the essence of me, but I had no form. And that's when I was awakened to the fact that, oh my God, this is me, without all the facade, without all the three-dimensional projections that I'm spewing, beyond the thought forms, beyond the 3D imaging and all the projections of consciousness. That's when I realized that this is what I really am. I'm the capability of creating any form I wish. I call it the higher self experience. That was my first higher self experience, where I found myself beyond all three-dimensional 3D realities.
You knew it.
And it was like this, and you knew everything.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when I come back to the body, I was back to being dumb Bill. But in that state, I felt like I was connected to everything.
You're not dumb Bill.
But that's what I felt like.
I understand.
I felt because at the moment, that beyond time, beyond space, beyond thought, I felt connected and knew all. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah.
But when I returned to my body, I felt back to oh my God, you can't hold that kind of information or knowledge or whatever you want to call it. There's nothing special. I'm not special. This is one of the things I try to teach everyone in my workshops. Yeah. That during an OBE, you can demand it. You can go into an OBE state, go to your astral body, stabilize your astral body, and then make the firm request, like higher self now. Make it a demand on yourself to experience that inner aspect of yourself. Use a term that resonates with you. It could be spiritual essence now or spiritual core now. And then some people are open to the experience. It all depends. Each individual is different. But in other words, don't take my word for this.
Try it.
Do it yourself. That's one of the reasons I teach self-initiated out-of-body experiences, is so people can have this profound experience for themselves. Many forms of yoga can initiate an OBE, just like people in ayahuasca can have an OBE. This is a natural experience. The term out-of-body is a misnomer. It's an experience of your true self, beyond the body. You transcend the body, yes, but it doesn't mean you necessarily have to leave the body.
You're really going in.
It's a matter of reconnecting with your true self. Right. Many people have these experiences, especially, let's face it, many of the yogis for 2,000 years. They've been recalling and writing about transcendental type experiences. And this is nothing new. The Bible has these transcendental experiences. Holy books of every culture talks about people transcending the body and having a profound spiritual experience. But what are they really doing? If you're transcending the body, you're having an out-of-body experience.
That's right.
It's a matter of semantics.
It's just a matter of semantics. We're going to leave it there because we're over time, but it was worth it.
I'm odd, you're different. That's not a bad double. I'm odd, you're different. That's not a bad double.